I opened my front door on a Tuesday morning to find a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association tucked in the mailbox, and my first thought was that they had finally lost their minds. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and had that unmistakable bureaucratic weight that meant someone somewhere had spent far too much time documenting their grievances. I tore it open while standing in my driveway, coffee mug still in hand, and started reading. "Dear Mr. Zachary Vance," it began. "This letter serves as formal notification that you are in violation of Meadowbrook Hills HOA Covenant Section 4.7, subsection B, regarding unapproved exterior structures. You have 30 days to remove the metal installation located in your front yard or face daily fines of $250. I stared at the words, reading them 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. The metal installation in my front yard. They were talking about the USGS survey marker, the United States Geological Survey benchmark that had been there since 1973, a full 20 years before this subdivision in Boulder County, Colorado, even existed. The same marker that sat on federal property technically loaned to me as part of the land purchase agreement. The same marker that I legally could not touch, move, or alter in any way without committing a federal crime. I walked back inside and pulled out the folder I kept with all my property documents. When I bought this house 3 years ago, the title company had made a very big deal about the survey marker. There were multiple disclosure forms, federal documentation, and even a letter from the USGS explaining that the marker was part of the National Spatial Reference System and was protected under federal law. Moving it or damaging it could result in fines up to $10,000 and potential jail time. The marker helped determine elevations and positions across the entire region. It was literally part of the infrastructure that made GPS and mapping systems work. My phone rang before I could decide what to do next. It was my neighbor, Tom Richardson, who lived 3 houses down. "Did you get a letter?" he asked without preamble. "About my supposed unapproved structure? Yeah, just opened it. They are hitting everyone this month. Patricia got one about her garden gnomes. The Martinezes got one about their basketball hoop. I think Sharon is on a power trip again." Sharon Whitmore. The HOA president and the exact kind of person who made the concept of homeowners associations a living nightmare. She was 52, had blonde hair that looked like it required industrial-strength hairspray, and wore the title of HOA president like she was running a small military dictatorship. She had moved into Meadowbrook Hills 5 years ago and had been making everyone's life progressively worse ever since. "Tom, they want me to remove the USGS benchmark." There was a pause. "The what?" "The survey marker. The federal survey marker that's been there since the 70s. The one that's literally federal property." "Oh, that metal disc thing. I always wondered what that was." "It's protected by federal law. I cannot remove it even if I wanted to, and they are threatening me with $250 daily fines." Tom whistled low. "That's insane. You need to talk to Sharon. Explain the situation." "I will, but you know how she is." "Yeah," Tom said grimly. "I know exactly how she is. Good luck, man." I called the HOA office immediately. The phone rang 6 times before someone picked up. "Meadowbrook Hills HOA. This is Brenda speaking." "Hi, Brenda. This is Zachary Vance from 847 Clearwater Drive. I need to speak with Sharon Whitmore about a violation letter I just received. Mrs. Whitmore is very busy right now. Can I take a message?" "This is urgent. The HOA is demanding I remove federal property from my yard, which is literally impossible and illegal." "I'll pass along your message, Mr. Vance. Someone will get back to you within 3 business days." 3 business days? I have 30 days total to comply with this ridiculous demand. "Company policy, sir. Have a good day." She hung up before I could argue further. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter and the USGS documentation side by side. This was going to be a problem. A big problem. 3 business days later, on Friday afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Vance, this is Sharon Whitmore from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. I understand you have questions about your violation notice." "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for calling. Yes, I need to explain something about that structure you mentioned. The unauthorized metal installation in your front yard. It's not an installation. It's a USGS benchmark, a federal survey marker that's been there since 1973. It's protected property that I legally cannot remove. Mr. Vance, I have driven past your property myself. There is clearly a metal structure embedded in your front yard that is not listed in your original landscaping approval from when you purchased the home. Because it's federal property, it's part of the National Spatial Reference System. The government owns it, not me. Then you should have filed for an exception with the HOA board when you purchased the property. I felt my jaw clench. Mrs. Whitmore, the marker has been there since 1973. This subdivision was built in 1993. The marker predates the HOA by 2 decades, and again, it's federal property. I have zero authority to remove it. According to our covenants, any exterior structure requires board approval, no exceptions. You have 26 days remaining to comply, or fines will begin accumulating. This is absurd. I have documentation from USGS. I have federal letters. I have title company disclosure forms. This marker is not movable. Then I suggest you contact your federal friends and have them move it. 26 days, Mr. Vance. She hung up. I sat there holding my phone, absolutely stunned by the conversation. Sharon Whitmore had just told me to get the federal government to move a survey marker because it violated HOA covenants. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I immediately called the USGS office in Denver. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached someone named David Chen in the National Geodetic Survey Division. Mr. Vance, yes, we have records of that benchmark. Its station designation is DF3442, part of the vertical control network. What seems to be the problem? I explained the situation. David listened quietly, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief. So let me make sure I understand, he said when I finished. Your HOA wants you to remove federal survey infrastructure because they think it's an unapproved decoration? That's exactly what's happening. Mr. Vance, that marker cannot be moved, period. It's part of critical infrastructure. Even we would need special authorization to relocate it, and that would only happen in extreme circumstances like major construction projects. An HOA complaint is not a valid reason. I tried explaining that. They do not care. Do you have documentation about the marker? Yes. It was all part of my home purchase. Good. Keep that safe. I'm going to send you an official letter from USGS that you can provide to your HOA. It will explain the federal protections and the penalties for interfering with the marker. I'm also going to flag this in our system in case anyone tries to damage or remove it. Thank you. I appreciate it. No problem. And Mr. Vance, do not let them intimidate you. Federal law supersedes HOA covenants every single time. They have no legal standing here whatsoever. The letter from USGS arrived via FedEx 2 days later. It was 3 pages long, printed on official letterhead, and signed by a regional director. It explained in very clear, very legal language that the survey marker was federal property, that it was protected under USC Title 18, Section 1858, and that any attempt to remove, damage, or interfere with the marker would be considered destruction of federal property and prosecuted accordingly. The letter also noted that the marker had been established in 1973 as part of a national survey project and had legal precedence over any local regulations or covenants established after that date. I made 3 copies and sent 1 to the HOA office via certified mail. I kept 1 for my records and gave 1 to my lawyer, just in case this spiraled further out of control. The response from Sharon came within 48 hours. Another certified letter. Mr. Vance, we have received your correspondence regarding the federal survey marker. While we acknowledge the marker's historical presence, this does not exempt you from HOA regulations. All exterior features must comply with community standards. We require you to petition USGS to relocate the marker to a less visible location or install decorative screening to minimize its visual impact. Failure to take action within 21 days will result in fines as previously stated. I read the letter twice, then called my lawyer, Marcus Webb. He had handled my home purchase and was familiar with the USGS documentation. Marcus, the HOA is insisting I either move the marker or hide it after I sent them the federal letter. Forward me everything, Marcus said. This is going to be fun. Fun is not the word I would use. Zachary, they are setting themselves up for a massive legal problem. You cannot touch federal property. They cannot force you to touch federal property, and they definitely cannot fine you for not touching federal property. Let me draft a response. Marcus's response was a work of art. 5 pages of legal citations, case law, and federal regulations. He explained that the HOA had no jurisdiction over federal property, that their covenants could not supersede federal law, and that any attempt to enforce fines would be considered harassment and potentially actionable. He also pointed out that if the HOA forced the issue, they could be held liable for encouraging the destruction of federal property. I sent Marcus's letter to the HOA. I also sent a copy to every board member individually, just to make sure they all saw it. The deadline came and went. On day 31, I received another certified letter. A fine notice for $250. They had actually done it. I called Marcus immediately. They fined me. Good. Do not pay it. In fact, I want you to formally dispute it in writing. This is going to court and we are going to crush them. I wrote the dispute letter that evening. I outlined the entire situation, attached copies of all documentation, and stated clearly that I would not be paying any fines related to federal property that I had no legal authority to alter. I sent it certified mail. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that my case would be heard at the monthly HOA board meeting. Homeowners were allowed to present their disputes in person before the board voted on enforcement actions. The meeting was held in the community center on a Thursday evening. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documentation and Marcus by my side. The room was set up like a small courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for homeowners. About 20 people were scattered throughout the room, probably there for their own disputes or just to watch the drama. Sharon Whitmore sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members. She was wearing a navy blue blazer and had her hair pulled back tight. She looked like she was ready for battle. "This meeting will come to order," she announced at exactly 7 p.m. "We have several items on the agenda tonight. First up is the dispute filed by Zachary Vance regarding violation notice 2026-447. I stood up and walked to the front with Marcus. "Mr. Vance, you have 10 minutes to present your case," Sharon said. Marcus stepped forward. "I'm Marcus Webb, legal counsel for Mr. Vance. Before we begin, I want to make sure the board understands the legal implications of this situation." "We are aware of your previous letter, Mr. Webb," Sharon said coldly. "Please proceed with your presentation." I laid out the documentation on a small table facing the board. The USGS letter, the title company disclosures, the federal regulations, and Marcus's legal analysis. "In 1973, I began, the United States Geological Survey installed a survey benchmark on the land that would eventually become my property. This marker is part of the National Spatial Reference System, which provides the foundation for all mapping, navigation, and engineering projects across the country. When this subdivision was developed in 1993, the developers had to work around existing federal infrastructure, including this marker. When I purchased my home in 2023, I was legally required to acknowledge the presence of this marker and agree to maintain it according to federal standards. I cannot move it. I cannot hide it. I cannot alter it in any way without committing a federal crime punishable by fines up to $10,000 and potential imprisonment. One of the other board members, a man named Gerald, raised his hand. "But surely the government can move it if we request it," Marcus answered. "The USGS has already responded to that question in writing. Survey markers are only relocated under extraordinary circumstances, such as major infrastructure projects that have no alternative. An HOA aesthetic complaint is not a valid reason for relocation. Furthermore, the cost of relocating a benchmark can exceed $50,000 because of the need to reestablish precise positioning and update all related geodetic data." Sharon leaned forward. "Mr. Vance, Mr. Webb, we understand your position. However, this community has standards. The metal disc in your yard is unsightly and not in keeping with the aesthetic character of Meadowbrook Hills. Surely there is a compromise." "There is no compromise available," Marcus said firmly. Federal law supersedes HOA covenants. This is not a negotiable situation. The marker stays exactly where it is, and Mr. Vance cannot be held liable for its presence. Then we will vote, Sharon said. Board members, you have heard the presentation. All in favor of upholding the violation and enforcing the fine? 4 hands went up, including Sharon's. Only Gerald abstained. The violation is upheld. The fine stands. Mr. Vance, you now owe $250, and the fine will continue to accumulate daily until the marker is removed or screened. Marcus gathered his papers. Mrs. Whitmore, members of the board, you have just made a serious legal error. We will see you in court. We walked out of the community center into the cool Colorado evening. I was furious and shaking slightly from the adrenaline. They actually did it, I said. They voted to fine me for federal property. Like I said, this is going to be fun. I will file in district court tomorrow. We are going to argue that the HOA has no authority to regulate federal property, and that their fines constitute harassment and violation of your property rights. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. Marcus named the HOA as the defendant and sought an injunction against the fines, compensation for legal fees, and a declaratory judgment that the HOA had no authority over the USGS marker. The filing made it into the local Boulder newspaper. A reporter named Jennifer Fisher called me that afternoon. Mr. Vance, I'm writing a story about your lawsuit against the HOA. Can you tell me what happened? I explained the entire situation. Jennifer listened, asking clarifying questions. She sounded genuinely shocked. So they are fining you for federal property that you legally cannot touch? Exactly, and they refuse to acknowledge that they have no authority over it. Can I quote you? Yes. And please, make sure people understand how absurd this is. I'm not trying to skirt HOA rules. I'm trying to follow federal law. The article ran 2 days later on the front page of the local section. Homeowner sued by HOA over federal survey marker was the headline. Jennifer had done excellent work, including quotes from USGS, my lawyer, and even a legal expert from the University of Colorado who explained that federal law always superseded local regulations. The story got picked up by a Denver news station, then another. By the end of the week, I was getting calls from news outlets across the country. The story had apparently struck a nerve with people who had their own HOA horror stories. I did 3 television interviews and lost count of the newspaper and radio requests. Sharon Whitmore, predictably, did not take the publicity well. She released a statement through the HOA's lawyer claiming that I was misrepresenting the situation and that the HOA was simply trying to maintain community standards. The statement was tone deaf and made things worse. People started showing up at HOA meetings to protest. The HOA's Facebook page was flooded with angry comments. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the fines kept accumulating according to the HOA. They sent me a bill for $7,000, representing 28 days of violations. I filed it with Marcus and ignored it. Tom Richardson called me one evening with disturbing news. Zachary, you need to check your front yard right now. I walked outside with my phone still pressed to my ear. My porch light illuminated the survey marker, and I could see immediately that something was wrong. Someone had spray painted over the bronze disc with black paint, obscuring all the markings and data. No, I breathed. No, no, no. I ran over and knelt beside the marker. The paint was still slightly tacky. This had happened within the last few hours. I took photos with my phone from every angle, documenting the vandalism. Tom, did you see who did this? No, I just noticed it when I was walking my dog. I am so sorry, man. I called Marcus first, then the police, then the USGS emergency number that David Chen had given me. Within an hour, my front yard was a crime scene. 2 Boulder police officers were taking my statement while a USGS field technician named Sarah examined the damage. This is bad, Sarah said, carefully photographing the vandalized marker. The data inscriptions are completely covered. We will need to clean this professionally and potentially resurvey the position to make sure nothing was disturbed. Can you tell if it was moved or tampered with beyond the paint? I asked. It looks stable, but I will need to do measurements. Vandalizing a federal survey marker is a serious crime, Mr. Vance. We will be filing charges against whoever did this. One of the police officers, a woman named Officer Rodriguez, finished writing notes. "Mr. Vance, do you have any idea who might have done this? I'm in the middle of a lawsuit with my HOA about this exact marker. They have been demanding I remove it." Officer Rodriguez and her partner exchanged glances. "We will need the details on that." I provided them with copies of all the correspondence, the violation notices, the fines, and the lawsuit filing. Officer Rodriguez read through them with increasing interest. "So the HOA has been pressuring you to remove this for over a month?" "Yes, and fining me daily because I refuse." "We will need to talk to the HOA board. This could be considered vandalism, destruction of federal property, or potentially intimidation related to your lawsuit." The investigation moved quickly. The police interviewed Sharon Whitmore the next day. They also pulled security camera footage from a neighbor's house that had a partial view of my front yard. The footage showed a dark sedan pulling up around 2 a.m. A figure got out, spent about 3 minutes near the marker, then drove away. The license plate was visible in several frames. The car was registered to Sharon's husband, Paul Whitmore. When the police confronted Paul, he initially denied everything. Then, faced with the video evidence, he claimed he was just trying to help solve a community problem. He said Sharon had been stressed about the lawsuit and the negative publicity, and he thought covering the marker would make it less noticeable, and maybe I would be more willing to negotiate. The police arrested him on charges of vandalism and destruction of federal property. Sharon was not arrested but was brought in for questioning. She denied knowing about Paul's plan, but text messages between them told a different story. The police found texts where Sharon had complained about the marker and joked that someone should just paint over that ugly thing. The story exploded in the media again. HOA president's husband arrested for vandalizing federal property ran in papers across Colorado. The national news picked it up. Late-night shows made jokes about it. The HOA became a punchline. An emergency board meeting was called 3 days after Paul's arrest. Sharon resigned as president, though she claimed it was for personal reasons and unrelated to the vandalism. The remaining board members voted to suspend all fines against me and formally acknowledge that the USGS marker was outside HOA jurisdiction. But the legal problems were far from over. The federal prosecutor's office got involved. Paul was facing serious charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office sent me a letter explaining that they would be pursuing the case and that the USGS would be seeking restitution for the cost of restoring the marker, which was estimated at around $5,000. Paul Whitmore hired a criminal defense attorney and tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor was not sympathetic. Destruction of federal survey infrastructure was taken very seriously, especially given the premeditated nature of the act and the evidence that he had done it to influence a civil lawsuit. My own lawsuit against the HOA was still moving forward despite Sharon's resignation. Marcus argued that we needed a formal court judgment to prevent future boards from trying the same tactics and to recover my legal fees. The court hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in Boulder District Court. Judge Patricia Hammond presided. The HOA sent their lawyer, a nervous-looking man named Richard Klein, who clearly knew he was fighting a losing battle. Marcus presented our case methodically. He walked the judge through the timeline, the federal protections, the USGS letters, and the HOA's repeated refusal to acknowledge their lack of jurisdiction. He also introduced the vandalism as evidence of the HOA's hostility toward federal law. "Your Honor," Marcus concluded, "this case represents a fundamental question about the limits of HOA authority. My client was threatened with thousands of dollars in fines for something he had no legal power to change. The HOA ignored federal law, ignored expert testimony, and ultimately, someone connected to the HOA leadership committed a federal crime in an attempt to force my client's compliance. We are asking the court to permanently enjoin the HOA from any enforcement action related to the USGS marker, to void all existing fines, and to award legal fees." Richard Klein stood up for the HOA's defense. "Your Honor, the HOA acknowledges that mistakes were made in this case. The board has since voted to recognize the federal marker as outside their jurisdiction, and all fines have been suspended. We believe that resolves the matter." Judge Hammond looked at him over her reading glasses. "Mr. Klein, suspended is not the same as voided. Is the HOA willing to formally void all fines and acknowledge in writing that they have no authority over federal property? Klein hesitated. We would prefer to settle this matter without a formal court judgment. I'm sure you would, Judge Hammond said dryly. But your client created this problem through their own actions. Mr. Webb, I'm granting your motions. The HOA is permanently enjoined from any enforcement action related to the USGS survey marker at 847 Clearwater Drive. All fines are voided. The HOA will pay Mr. Vance's legal fees, which will be calculated by the court. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to send written notice to all homeowners in Meadowbrook Hills, explaining that federal property is outside HOA jurisdiction and that they will not attempt to regulate such property in the future. Klein looked like he had been punched. Your Honor, that seems excessive. Mr. Klein, your client fined a homeowner for obeying federal law. Then, someone associated with HOA leadership vandalized federal property. I think a simple notice to homeowners is quite reasonable. Do you want me to order additional remedial measures? No, Your Honor. Then we're done here. Judgment for the plaintiff. Marcus and I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It's over, I asked. The civil case is over. Paul's criminal case is still pending, but that's not your problem. What about the legal fees? The court will calculate it, but you're probably looking at somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 that the HOA will have to pay. That's going to hurt their budget and hopefully serve as a lesson. We celebrated with lunch at a nearby restaurant. For the first time in 2 months, I could enjoy a meal without thinking about violation notices and fines. Paul Whitmore's case went to trial 6 months later. I had to testify about the timeline of the HOA dispute and how it led to the vandalism. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding Paul guilty on both counts: vandalism of federal property and destruction of federal survey infrastructure. The judge sentenced him to 18 months of probation, 300 hours of community service, a $10,000 fine, and restitution to USGS for the marker restoration. Paul looked devastated. Sharon, sitting in the gallery, looked even worse. The USGS completed restoration of the marker a few weeks before the trial. Sarah, the technician who had initially responded, came back with a specialized team. They carefully removed all the paint using chemical solvents that would not damage the bronze, re-engraved the identification markings, and resurveyed the position to make sure nothing had shifted. The marker looked better than it had before, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Good as new, Sarah said, packing up her equipment. Actually, better than new since we updated some of the markings. This marker should be good for another 50 years. I hope the next owner has an easier time with it than I did, I said. Sarah laughed. Well, if they do have problems, they can point to this case. You're basically the poster child for federal property rights now. The HOA notice went out the following week. It was a simple, straightforward letter explaining the court's judgment and acknowledging that certain types of federal property were outside HOA authority. The letter was signed by the new HOA president, a woman named Carol Peters, who seemed far more reasonable than Sharon had been. Carol actually called me personally to apologize. Mr. Vance, on behalf of the board, I want to say how sorry we are for everything you went through. What happened was wrong, and it should never have escalated the way it did. I appreciate that, Carol. I never wanted to fight with the HOA. I just wanted them to understand basic federal law. I understand, and I want you to know that we have implemented new procedures. Anytime a violation involves something that might be regulated by another authority, whether federal, state, or county, we will now consult with legal counsel before issuing any notices. We are also providing training to board members about the limits of HOA authority. That sounds like a good step forward. It is. And again, I am truly sorry. Life slowly returned to normal after that. The media attention faded. The neighbors stopped asking about the lawsuit every time they saw me. The survey marker sat in my front yard, undisturbed and gleaming, a small bronze reminder of the whole ridiculous ordeal. Tom Richardson came over one Saturday afternoon while I was mowing the lawn. He had a 6-pack of beer and a grin on his face. "I figured you could use this," he said, handing me a cold bottle. We sat on my back porch and watched the sunset over the Rocky Mountains in the distance. The view was one of the reasons I had bought this house in the first place. "Do you ever regret buying here?" Tom asked. "After everything with the HOA?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but mostly no. I love this house. I love the location. And honestly, I think the HOA will be better going forward. Sometimes it takes a major screw-up for organizations to change." "That's optimistic of you." "Maybe, or maybe I'm just too tired to be angry anymore." Tom laughed and clinked his bottle against mine. "Fair enough." A few months later, I received a letter from David Chen at USGS. He thanked me for protecting the marker and informed me that the agency was using my case as a training example for property owners who had federal survey infrastructure on their land. He included a certificate of appreciation and a detailed explanation of the marker's history and importance. Apparently, benchmark DF 3442 had been part of a major survey project in the early 1970s that helped establish vertical control points across the entire Front Range of Colorado. The data from this marker had been used in hundreds of subsequent projects, including highway construction, flood mapping, and seismic studies. It was a small piece of bronze in my yard, but it represented decades of scientific work and served purposes I had never fully understood. I framed the certificate and hung it in my office, right next to the court judgment voiding the HOA fines. They made an odd pair, but together they told the whole story. Sharon Whitmore moved out of Meadowbrook Hills about a year after everything concluded. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that she and Paul had decided to downsize and move closer to their daughter in Fort Collins. I never spoke to her again after her resignation. I was not interested in vindication or apologies from her specifically. The court had ruled, the law had been upheld, and that was enough. The legal fees from the HOA amounted to $18,000. The HOA had to take out a special assessment on all homeowners to cover the cost, which made Sharon even less popular in her final months as a resident. Some people blamed me for the assessment, arguing that I should have just worked something out with the board, but most understood that I had been backed into a corner and had no choice but to fight. Carol Peters turned out to be an excellent HOA president. She was fair, reasonable, and actually read the governing documents before making decisions. Violations were issued sparingly and only for legitimate problems. The community started functioning the way it was supposed to, with the HOA handling actual maintenance issues rather than picking petty fights with homeowners. I served on the Architectural Review Committee for a year at Carol's request. She thought my experience with the survey marker would provide a useful perspective when evaluating requests. It was actually interesting work. I helped approve deck additions, fence installations, and landscaping projects. And whenever something unusual came up, we made sure to research any potential conflicts with other regulations before issuing a decision. One case involved a homeowner who wanted to install a ham radio antenna. The HOA covenants restricted antenna heights, but federal FCC regulations gave licensed amateur radio operators certain rights to reasonable antenna installations. Instead of immediately denying the request, we worked with the homeowner to find a solution that satisfied both the FCC requirements and the aesthetic concerns of the neighborhood. It was the kind of common-sense compromise that should have happened with my survey marker from the beginning. Marcus Webb and I stayed in touch after the lawsuit concluded. He sent me referrals whenever someone contacted him about HOA disputes, and I became something of an informal consultant on cases involving conflicts between HOA rules and other regulatory authorities. I was not a lawyer, but I understood the homeowner perspective better than most attorneys, and I could explain complex technical issues in plain language. One case involved a homeowner being fined for a telecommunications box that Comcast had installed on the side of his house. The HOA claimed it was unsightly and violated the architectural standards. The homeowner pointed out that Comcast had an easement and had installed the box according to FCC regulations. Marcus and I helped him draft a response similar to what I had used, citing federal preemption and the limitations on HOA authority. The HOA backed down without litigation. Another case involved solar panels. The homeowner wanted to install them on a roof, but the HOA said they violated the aesthetic guidelines. Colorado actually has a solar rights law that limits HOA, restrictions on solar installations. We helped the homeowner present her case, and the HOA approved the installation. These small victories felt good. Each one represented someone avoiding the nightmare I had gone through. The survey marker itself became something of a conversation piece. When people visited my house for the first time, they often asked about it. I would tell an abbreviated version of the story, and they would inevitably shake their heads in disbelief. A few people asked to take photos with it, which I found amusing. My 15 minutes of fame had apparently extended to the bronze disc in my yard. A geology professor from the University of Colorado contacted me about bringing a class to see the marker as part of a lecture on geodetic surveying. I agreed, and on a warm spring morning, I found myself explaining the whole saga to 20 college students who were learning about survey infrastructure. The professor used it as a teaching example about the importance of maintaining geodetic networks and the legal protections that exist to preserve them. This marker, the professor explained to the students, is part of a system that most people never think about, but without it, we would not have accurate maps, GPS would not work properly, and major construction projects would be significantly more difficult. Mr. Vance's case demonstrates how critical infrastructure can exist in unexpected places and why we have laws to protect it. One student raised her hand. But couldn't the government have just moved it to avoid the problem? I answered before the professor could. Moving a survey marker is not like moving a mailbox. These positions are calculated and measured with extreme precision. Moving this marker would mean resurveying the entire area, updating databases, and potentially affecting hundreds of projects that reference this position. The cost would be enormous, and there is no good reason to do it just because an HOA thinks it is ugly. The student nodded, looking thoughtful. It was gratifying to see young people learning from what I had been through. Life continued. Seasons changed. I watched my neighbors come and go. I made improvements to my house, all properly filed with the HOA and approved without incident. I adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Cooper, who loved lying in the front yard near the survey marker on sunny afternoons. Tom joked that Cooper was providing security for federal property. 3 years after the lawsuit concluded, I received an unexpected call from Jennifer Fisher, the reporter who had first written about my case. Mr. Vance, I'm doing a follow-up story on HOA reform in Colorado. Your case was cited in legislative testimony last session, and there is a new bill being proposed that would explicitly prohibit HOAs from regulating federal property. I was hoping to interview you about it. Really? My case led to legislation? It was one of several high-profile incidents. But yes, your situation was specifically mentioned. The bill would create a safe harbor for homeowners who are dealing with federal installations on their property. It would also impose penalties on HOAs that try to fine homeowners for complying with federal law. I gave Jennifer the interview, talking about the importance of clear boundaries for HOA authority and the need to protect homeowners from unreasonable enforcement actions. The bill passed 6 months later with bipartisan support. The governor signed it in a small ceremony, and I was invited to attend. Standing in the state capitol building, watching the governor sign legislation that had been partly inspired by my ordeal, felt surreal. It was validation that fighting back had been the right choice, not just for me, but for everyone who would come after. The governor shook my hand after the signing. Thank you for standing up for yourself, Mr. Vance. This law is going to protect a lot of people. I appreciate that, Governor. I just wish I had not needed to go through all of that in the first place. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes a hard case to create good law. You should be proud. I drove back to Boulder that afternoon thinking about everything that had happened. What started as a ridiculous violation notice had turned into a federal crime investigation, a lawsuit, a criminal trial, media attention, and ultimately, legislative reform. All because an HOA president could not accept that she did not have authority over a small bronze disc in my yard. The marker was still there when I got home, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Cooper ran over to greet me, tail wagging, and we sat together on the front steps looking at it. You know, Cooper, I said, scratching behind his ears, that little piece of metal caused more trouble than anything else I own. But I'm glad I fought for it. Sometimes you have to stand up for what is right, even when it seems easier to just give in. Cooper licked my hand, which I took as agreement. Tom came over that evening with another six-pack. We had made it a tradition to occasionally sit on my porch and catch up on neighborhood drama. "I heard you met the governor," he said. "News travels fast. Small community, so you are officially a local celebrity now?" "Hardly, but it was nice to see something positive come out of all that mess." "You know what the funny thing is?" Tom said. "Sharon spent so much energy trying to get rid of that marker, and now it is probably the most protected thing in the entire subdivision. Nobody is going to touch it ever again." He was right. The marker had gone from being an obscure piece of federal infrastructure to being famous, or at least locally famous. It had its own Wikipedia entry now, written by someone who had followed the case. The entry explained the marker's technical specifications, its history, and the legal battle that had surrounded it. I sometimes wondered what Sharon thought about it all. Did she regret pushing the issue? Did she understand that she had been fundamentally wrong, or did she still think I should have just compromised? I would never know, and it did not really matter. She was gone, the law was clear, and the marker was safe. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Carol's leadership. There were occasional disputes, of course, but nothing that rose to the level of legal action. People learned to work together, to communicate clearly, and to actually read the rules before filing complaints. It was not perfect, but it was functional. I eventually sold my house 5 years later when I got a job offer in Seattle. The listing mentioned the USGS marker prominently, framing it as a unique historical feature rather than a problem. The new owner, a geology enthusiast named Dr. Richard Torres, was actually excited about it. He had read about the case and thought it was fascinating. "I promise to take good care of it," Richard said during the final walkthrough. "I'm sure you will. Just do not let anyone from an HOA tell you otherwise." He laughed. "After what you went through, I'm ready." I left Colorado with mixed feelings. I loved the mountains, the community, and the house I had fought so hard to protect. But Seattle offered new opportunities, and I was ready for a fresh start. Before I left, I stopped by Marcus's office to say goodbye. He had become a good friend over the years, not just my lawyer. "Keep fighting the good fight," I told him, "always. And if you ever have HOA problems in Seattle, give me a call. I know some good lawyers out there." Hopefully I will have learned my lesson and avoid HOAs entirely. Smart man. My last stop was Tom's house. We shared one final beer on his porch, looking out at the neighborhood. "It will not be the same without you," Tom said. "You will manage, and at least you have a good story to tell about the crazy neighbor who sued the HOA over a survey marker." Best story in the neighborhood, hands down. We said our goodbyes, and I drove away from Meadowbrook Hills for the last time. In my rearview mirror, I could see the Rocky Mountains rising against the blue sky, beautiful and permanent. The whole experience had taught me more than I ever wanted to know about property law, federal regulations, and HOA politics. But it had also taught me about standing up for principles, about the importance of understanding your rights, and about the value of good legal counsel when you need it. The survey marker was still there, exactly where it had been since 1973, doing its job of providing precise geodetic data for scientists, engineers, and surveyors. It had outlasted the HOA drama, outlasted Sharon Whitmore's presidency, and would probably outlast everyone who had been involved in the dispute. That felt appropriate somehow. In Seattle, I bought a condo in a building with minimal HOA involvement. The rules were simple. Pay your dues, do not make excessive noise, and do not block the common areas. There were no architectural review committees, no violation notices for minor aesthetic issues, and definitely no arguments about federal property. But I kept copies of all the documentation from the Colorado case, the USGS certificate, the court judgment, the news articles, and even a few photos of the marker. They sat in a file box in my closet, a reminder of a strange chapter in my life. Occasionally, someone would ask me about the most difficult thing I had ever dealt with as a homeowner. I would tell them about the survey marker, and they would listen with expressions ranging from disbelief to outrage to amusement. The reactions were always entertaining. "So let me get this straight," one friend said after hearing the story. "The HOA tried to fine you for not committing a federal crime?" Essentially, yes. That's the most American thing I have ever heard. Maybe it was. The collision of bureaucratic authority, federal law, property rights, and neighborhood politics created a perfect storm of absurdity. But it also demonstrated that the system could work when someone was willing to fight back. The courts had ruled correctly, the law had been enforced, and reforms had been implemented to prevent similar situations. Years later, I still occasionally Googled the marker to see if anyone had written about it. The Wikipedia entry remained, updated periodically with technical details about geodetic surveys. There were a few blog posts and articles referencing the case as an example of HOA overreach. And once, I found a YouTube video of someone visiting the marker and explaining its history and the legal battle surrounding it. The video had over 100,000 views. I left a comment. "I'm the guy who lived through this. Thanks for keeping the story alive." The responses were overwhelmingly supportive. People shared their own HOA horror stories, thanked me for fighting back, and expressed hope that more homeowners would stand up for their rights. It felt good to know that my experience had resonated with others and maybe helped them in their own disputes. The lesson, if there was one, was simple. Know your rights, document everything, and do not be afraid to fight when you are clearly in the right. HOAs serve important functions, but they are not above the law, and they cannot override federal regulations no matter how much they might want to. The survey marker in my old front yard continued doing its quiet, important work, measuring and marking the earth with precision. It had become famous for a strange reason, but its real purpose remained unchanged. And somewhere in Boulder, homeowners could now point to a small bronze disc and know that it represented not just geodetic data, but also the principle that some things are bigger than neighborhood covenants and architectural guidelines. I never regretted buying that house, despite everything. It gave me a home, taught me valuable lessons, and ultimately led to positive changes that would help other people. The fight had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had been worth it. And somewhere in a USGS database, benchmark DF3442 was still listed as active and protected, with notes about its unusual history and the importance of federal property rights. It was a small notation in a vast system, but it told a story that mattered. The story of standing up to unreasonable authority, of protecting scientific infrastructure, and of one homeowner who refused to back down when he was right. That was something worth remembering, worth preserving, just like the marker itself.